Hi, welcome to Life on the Rock, and tonight our guest is Trent Horn. He is an apologist, and you've probably heard him on Catholic Answers. His specialty is combating the new atheism, life issues, sexuality, marriage. He's going to talk about the Catholic defense of all these very current and relevant topics that we deal with today. He's sharp as a tack, and he's a young man, so we're glad to have him on the show.
Doug, brother.
How you been?
Good, how are you?
You been traveling a lot?
Not so much in the summer. Summer slows down a bit, but we're getting some stuff lined up for the fall. We had some stuff in June and August and September and October pickup, especially with things changing as they are, the landscape of our country and our world. There's a lot of people out there, which I think is going to make this show so good with Trent, is really learning how to address these issues, secularism, atheism, the pro-life issues, marriage issues, and as things are really, again, changing, the dynamics and chemistry of things are changing, we need to be, prepared for that fight, need to be on that cutting edge, you need to be battle ready, for the spiritual fight.
Right, and the Holy Father is speaking on these issues. The last few months, he's been speaking on his Wednesday audiences on marriage and family, and he gave a couple of beautiful addresses on the complementarity of men and women, or reciprocity, how they are called by God to form a union, and each other's gifts help build the other up. So we know in Genesis it said, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. And the second account, we're told that Eve is made from the rib of Adam. And when Eve is brought to Adam, we have that beautiful love song. The man said, "This is at last bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of the man." And he talks about these two texts and how we need to accept these differences as complementarity and live them harmoniously. And if we do that, it's a blessing. He said there's a distrust in the world today that does reject the Creator's plan at times, and there's a distrust between God and between men and women at times. We see that today. And obviously there's been a struggle for women's rights and to have them have equal place at the table, so to speak, and that needs to continue and to be done. But it's also, we have to maintain there are different gift packages, right, to men and women.
Yeah, absolutely, the complementary of it. It's interesting because I think about that particular passage in Genesis when God, creates Eve from Adam's rib, and Adam says, "Finally, this one is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh," which I would say are probably the most romantic words any man ever said to a woman, regardless of what, a Hallmark greeting card might write or some hip-hop rap song might sing about. The fact that the man can look at the woman and say, "Finally, after all the creation that's been shown to him, this one is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." There's something so powerful about this. And then, of course, the first command that God gives to Adam and Eve is be fruitful and multiply. And through this fruitful multiplication, what you have is God breathing his image and likeness into the womb of the mother at the moment of the conception. And there's something so amazing there. You can only imagine the devil himself seeing this, if you could kind of put it in this term, and thinking, I've got to mess this up.
Right.
Because all of civilization, as St. John Paul II tells us, flows through the family. And it all hinges upon the man and the woman and the complementary nature of man and woman that Pope Francis is talking about. So the devil's looking at this probably thinking, I've got to do everything possible to destroy this, disrupt this, and just break this apart, tear this up. And we're seeing that in the battle against family and marriage.
And the Pope talks about the passage where he says, that he creates, all these living things on earth. He brings them all to Adam to name them, but he didn't find someone suitable for him. He needed to have a helper that was fit for him, right? The scripture says. And so he casts this deep sleep, and makes Eve from the rib. And those are, imaginative. John Paul used the term mythic language to describe these very deep truths, that Eve is a gift for Adam and his equal, right? Equal dignity. She's taken from Adam. So it's of the same substance, equal in dignity, and given to him to be a helpmate out of love. And they both are supposed to help. We're supposed to help one another. But, I was thinking about it. We've heard so many guests on the show, some of the young women we've had on the show talk about finding a suitable spouse, right? And it concerns them because they don't see a lot of men in church and things like that. Women have I think a great spiritual sense of nature about them. And it just occurred to me that maybe that's a mission field for women to help cultivate this faith in men in some way. And I know men have a special ministry to men, but you know, it is such a needed role in the world today. I think we need each other.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we when we come together the way God has created us to, and we fill each other's gaps, if you will, and we can cling to one another. This is very difficult to pull apart. You know, if we try to find our own separate identity and not the complementary nature of God's design, and we try to come together. You know, and I've done this in settings with youth and such, and get a couple guys up there on the arms and pull. They can eventually pull until the fists come apart. But you lock those fingers together and you cling to one another as man and woman to fill each other's gaps, complement, hang on tight. They can pull and pull, and they don't pull that apart.
Right.
So when we do it God's way and come together, complement and humility and giving of one another to each other, it's hard to separate that.
Right.
You know, and I want to make a comment too, Father. We talked about for the show about that statement that was made by Cardinal Caffarra, Archbishop of Bologna, in an interview in 2008. And this has been on Facebook recently, and you've seen this put out there by 1 Peter 5 and other good Catholic websites. And what they've noted here is that in this interview in 2008 with Cardinal Caffarra, he said that he was put in the position by St. John Paul II as head of marriage, family studies, and so forth. And he had written a letter to Sister Lucia while she was still alive, asking for prayers from her, through her bishop, of course. And she wrote back to him, which he didn't think was going to happen. And in the letter, very simply, she said this, that the final battle between the reign of Satan and the Lord would be over the family and marriage, and that this is an area where anybody who is engaged in this battle will be persecuted. They will be attacked because of how important this decisive moment in battle is. But then she said this at the end, but don't worry, because the Blessed Mother has crushed the head of Satan. So again, why we should pray our rosary, cling to Our Lady, and be spiritually prepared for that fight with our Blessed Mother there always, because this battle is real. And Sister Lucia even makes that mention to Cardinal Caffarra. So check that out. It's important to know that we are in that decisive time right now.
Okay, well, don't go away. We'll be back with Trent Horn, so be back in a moment.
Welcome back to Life on the Rock. I'm Doug Barry along with Father Mark. We are the Rock House Compadres, the only Rock House Compadres that I know of on the face of the earth. I think, Father, it's true. You're with us in the Rock House, and we have with us tonight Trent Horn. It's my horn. How you doing?
Doing well.
Good to have you on the show, Trent.
Good to be here.
You are a Catholic Answers guy, which means you know everything.
I know enough to get by.
Well, Catholic Answers has a great reputation for being that one organization out there that just will take on anything and everything head on. I remember meeting Carl probably 25 years ago or so, back in Lincoln, Nebraska. He'd come out there to give a talk, and I just started my ministry Radix within the first year. And I remember meeting him, and one of the first things he said to me was, he says, well, congratulations, Doug, on this new ministry. You got a great diocese, Lincoln Diocese, but remember this, the laborer is worth his wage. I said, oh, what's that mean? He says, there's going to be people out there who are going to think you got to do everything for the Lord, which is great, but if you have a family, you got to feed them. Great advice from Carl. So thank you, Carl. If you get this message, I appreciate that very much. It's been helpful over the 25 years or so. But you've been with Catholic Answers how long now?
I've been there for about 2.5 years. Okay. So when I first joined Catholic Answers, it was just a real amazing treat, you know, to walk in here. It kind of harkens back to my comic book days, which are still very vibrant. You know, it was like I was joining the Justice League. You know, here's the Catholic Superman and the Catholic Batman. You know, and like here's Robin, the boy wonder, coming in to try to be an apologist. But they really warmly welcome me, and I've been happy to contribute to them to help people explain and defend the Catholic faith.
All right. So in the comic book world, who would Tim Staples be?
Tim Staples. I'm going to have to call him the Catholic Superman.
Okay.
I mean, when that guy's just on the radio, it's just the bullets, they bounce right off him, and he can charge right through anything.
He's got laser eyes. It can burn through anything. All right.
Although I might say that Jimmy Akin is just the Catholic Batman, because that guy is always one step ahead, and just up here, it's just amazing. And so having them as mentors has been a real treat.
Yeah, it's a good group, and the show is great. I listen to it a lot. Patrick Hoffman, of course, hosts it, and you're on there periodically. How's that work? You're on there once a week, every other week, give or take, or how's that work out?
I'm usually on Catholic Answers Live about 4 to 6 hours a month, usually on for 2 weeks and then off a week. And my shows are unique in that I only allow non-Catholics to call in. So I do shows such as Why Are You an Atheist? And only atheists can call in. Or why are you pro-choice, or why are you a Protestant? And only those people are allowed to call in, and so Catholics benefit by listening and seeing apologetics and defending the faith in real life, unscripted, and I try to demonstrate how to do that in a persuasive yet charitable way.
Right, and that is something I have to say about the show is the charity is clearly there. It's always trying to reach out and try to help the souls out there, give everybody a good understanding what's going on, but never bashing and putting anybody down, which is always a phenomenal way to do it, of course. Now, your background, though, you have not always been Catholic. Give us a little history, a little synopsis here.
Sure. Well, I was raised in a nominally Christian home. I mean, my mother was Catholic, and then she left the church, and my father's Jewish. And so we were brought up, we would watch Bible videos here and there, but otherwise we didn't go to church or anything like that. By the time I got to high school, I was a deist. I was someone who believed there was a God out there, but I wasn't Christian. I thought religion was just kind of a scam for simple-minded people. And then I came to know a Catholic youth group, and through them I did my homework, and I decided that Christianity was true, that God had revealed himself through Jesus Christ. But then I came to a crossroads where I had to decide what church should I join. And I looked at all the different ones, and I wanted to be like the very first Christians. And so in my research, I realized the first Christians, what they believed was closest to what the Catholic Church believes now. And so when I was a junior in high school, I was baptized and then confirmed and received into the Catholic Church.
Is it common at that point for a high schooler to research the history of Christianity?
Well, I think for me, I try not to make a lot of decisions in my life just based on feelings or wanting to join something because my friends are there. I wanted to see where the evidence was and where the facts were. And I would ask these people at my parish in Arizona, where I first got started in all of this, hard questions. And they gave me good answers, and that impressed me. And I wanted to go knowing that if I'm going to commit to this is my whole life going into it. I want to make sure I have good evidence for it. And so I felt there was good evidence for both God's revelation in Christ and that Christ established one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church on Peter and the Apostles that exists to this day.
I'm curious real quick here before we go to Father's got something to say here, but I'm going to ask, seeking evidence before you make a lifelong decision like that, how did the dating process go with you and your wife?
Well, I think what's good there is I wanted to definitely seek evidence, and the evidence was abundant. I was more worried that the evidence on her end would come up paltry, like maybe she shouldn't commit to this schlub over here. But it was truly that, obviously the second greatest moment of my life. First grade is when I was baptized. The second was when I married my wife, Laura, and just going through that path and knowing that I found someone that most importantly, while our senses of humor and personalities are similar, and that's great for marriage, knowing that our faith and even defending our faith is key to our identities. And so when you marry someone, you want to make sure that part of the identity is close because you're going to be in it for the long haul. And I think one of the first things in apologetics parents end up doing is fielding tough questions from their children. And so it's nice to know I have a good partner in that.
Right. Yeah, I tell my own kids, I have 5 children, I tell them all, and other young people I talk to, and if you're listening or watching now, think about this. Being married to someone equal faith, absolutely important, but you got to marry someone who's a fighter too. Someone who has that something inside that grit that says, I'm not laying down on this. I'm in this for the long haul. I'm in this to get your soul and my soul to heaven, and anybody that God entrusts to our care along the way. And so you have to have that attitude of, we're taking the beach, we're storming the beach, taking the hill, and we're not giving it up. We're like Marines, we don't retreat. You may pull back and regroup, but you don't retreat. Right. All right, not that going on a retreat is a bad thing, because it's like regrouping to get back in the fight. Anyway, Father.
What brought you to that first Catholic youth group, and what attracted you to keep coming back?
Well, I was in my high school English teacher's class during lunch getting a paper graded, and then a bunch of other students came in, and they had Hungry Howie's pizza, which is this deliciously cheesy, greasy pizza, so greasy when you're done and you pick up the box, you can look through it. So I figured I might as well stay for that, and my friends were there. But I started going back to the meetings because I found them interesting, and these people and what they taught, it exploded a lot of my stereotypes and preconceptions about Christianity. And so they were warm and knowledgeable, and through a process, it got me on my journeys. But that's that one day in sophomore English class at lunch is where it got started.
And from that point on, then, you move from there into becoming a Catholic apologist. I mean, that's quite a jump. I mean, what prompted you, and at what time, to actually take the step to get into deeper understanding and appreciation and study to now being where you're at here?
Well, I think the reason for that is, being a convert, I had to go through all of these objections myself. I had to go through the objections that Jesus never existed or he never rose from the dead to become a Christian. And then when I looked at the different churches, I had to read, people who said, oh, the Catholic Church is not the true church, it's an apostate church, and look at their arguments and come to the conclusion, wait, here's what's wrong with all these arguments. So a lot of learning apologetics was first just convincing myself. And then once that was done, I saw that I had done a lot of reading and understood the issues where many other people had simply taken the faith for granted. And so I enjoyed equipping them and teaching them how to defend the faith. And then after college, I would travel the country doing pro-life mission work at university campuses where I engaged secular students, where I engaged Protestant students. And so I would have these dialogues, and that honed, along with, with prayer and study, my ability to dialogue and debate with those who disagreed. And eventually, I loved this so much, teaching and equipping people. I was doing it on my own, volunteering, going to parishes, and I gathered these materials. And one fateful day, I was at Catholic Answers at their headquarters, leading a group of teens on a tour there. And someone gave me a hint they might be hiring an apologist, so I ran into Tim Staples and said, I want to throw my hat into the ring, and they took me on.
And Superman said, join up, son. Yes.
And he welcomed me to the Fortress of Solitude.
So is comic book conversation, does that go on a lot there at Catholic Answers?
It does go on a lot with Jimmy, actually. What was funny was when I first started at Catholic Answers, imagine what's the interview process to become an apologist with Catholic Answers. And we went through, I had to sit down for 1 hour with Jimmy Aiken and let him grill me. Wow. If you can imagine a more terrifying experience. But in that process, Jimmy and I found that we're actually very similar in many things. We both have a philosophy background, converts, a pro-life background, and we both enjoy comic books. In fact, every so often, actually frequently, Jimmy will come to work wearing a t-shirt with a comic book hero's logo on it. And so I always try to prove my nerd knowledge to say, oh, I know who that is. That's Shazam, or that's the Flash. And so sometimes, though, he has shirts that even stump me. And so I give that up to him.
So he's an expert. He's a connoisseur of the comic book world.
Yeah, not just of the faith, but of almost anything.
So you really take to and like the debate aspect of the faith, because a lot of people don't. And I know later on in the show we want to get into some examples of how we can address certain things that are very, very prominent in our world right now. But you gravitated towards that idea of actually getting into that debate scenario.
Yeah, I've done about 10 or 11 formal debates on a variety of subjects, on atheism, on abortion. I did a debate on whether Jesus even existed against probably the world's leading scholar who denies that Jesus existed. And I like debates when they're done charitably, because I think that we should be out destroying arguments. We should be arguing for the faith, but not in an argumentative sort of way. And really, I like debate and dialogue because we believe the faith is true, and other people think that what they believe is true. So we disagree. So it's good for those who disagree to go to a platform, and they both engage each other in a fair debate, and those who are watching can evaluate it for themselves. And I think that what the church teaches can stand up to the rigors of formal debate, of what's presented in peer-reviewed journals, and even on Dialogue on Catholic Answers Live, which is kind of a mini debate, though I try to treat it more as a dialogue with the callers.
All right. And I think one of the things that stands out to me is that there are a lot of people out there who would look to something like Catholic Answers or someone like yourself as an apologist who really is an expert in getting into the debate realm and think, okay, that's good for them. I could never do that, and to kind of leave it off to someone else. And granted, some people are gifted more in these areas than others. However, we should all have a basic understanding of the basic teachings, faith and morals of our church, should we not?
Oh, absolutely. 1 Peter 3:15 says we should always be ready to give a reason for for the hope within us, but do so with gentleness and reverence. Now, not all of us are called to get up behind a podium and debate someone from the other side. Very few and select people are called to do that. But we all are called to defend the faith when people challenge it. And I find the best way to do that isn't necessarily to have all the answers memorized. It's to ask someone who's questioning you questions in return. Ask them, what do they think? Why do they think that? How do they know that what they believe that counters the church is actually true? And then when you get better at this, asking questions of those who disagree, you can help show that their worldview has inconsistencies and that it falls apart when you ask the right questions. And so when you listen to my shows on Catholic Answers Live, like why are you an atheist, or why are you pro-choice, or why are you Protestant, 80% of the time I'm asking the caller a question to try to show that their position they're arguing from doesn't actually work, and my position is more coherent and has better evidence for it.
I have noticed that about some of your talks, and what I have picked up from radio and some other debate clips I've seen is you even bring up the word consistency. You say to the audience, in fact, the one that I saw recently, I ask you to be consistent in your way of thinking, you know, and study and learn this. Unafraid to just throw it out there and say, dig into it. Dig into it, and you'll find the consistency of 2,000 years of Catholic teaching on faith and morals. It just doesn't change, as it will not change today, because there's a lot going on that people think, well, you know, things have been said from the Vatican that kind of imply that possibly this and this is going to change, and it simply is not going to. You talk about the fact that when there are these attacks or these affronts, if you will, these assaults against our faith, we should have some preparation to make a defense against it. Leo XIII said this in Christians as Citizens, and I'm not real big on a lot of encyclicals, but this is one that really stood out to me. A friend of mine passed it my way. He said, our silence in the face of attacks against the church is an insult to God. And it does not go hand in hand with our salvation. It only emboldens the wicked. So how would you respond to Leo XIII in 1891 saying that, yes, we should not remain silent. We should be able to get out and defend the church on these attacks, because a lot of people don't think it's their business. It's kind of let you believe what you want to believe and I'll believe what I want to believe.
Right. I'd say amen to the Holy Father if I was there at that time. And really what he was facing at that time at the end of the 19th century is not too different from what we're facing at the beginning of the 21st. I mean, this was a time when the church was being rigorously attacked by those who were embracing Darwin's theory of evolution, saying that this would spell the death knell for Christianity. There were the higher form critics at the end of the 19th century saying that the Bible is a purely human construct and all the tales about Jesus are myth. And so that's what he was saying, that at his time, people who refused to respond to this were tacitly consenting to allow this error to spread and lead people away from the church. And so today we're in even a much better place than Catholics were at the end of the 19th century. We have all of this knowledge compiled along the internet at websites like EWTN.com, Catholic.com, where it's so much easier for Catholics to go find these answers, learn them, and then share them with other people. I mean, if we think about how we spend our free time, and it's so important to have leisure so that we're well rested, but when we indulge so much in leisure, when we can spend some time learning about the faith and sharing it with others, we really are making an affront to God that we're not willing to defend this precious gift, the deposit of faith that he's given us.
Right. Now, right on that. We've got a video we're going to go to before we go to our break here from Christophonic on the church and the accusation, the assault against the Catholics that we discriminate against gays or those of homosexual attraction, same-sex attraction. And this, of course, is a major issue going on in the world right now. With the Supreme Court just making its statement, and many other areas of the world, Ireland, Germany, other places where we're seeing this real struggle, Canada, the breakdown. So we're going to go to this video, hit the break, come back and talk to Trent a little bit about how we engage our society, our culture with regards to the church's teaching and understanding on those who struggle with same-sex attraction. We're going to check out this video by Christophonic, take a break, and be back after this.
I'm here at the beautiful Golden Gate Bridge. And listen, I do a lot of question and answers with people, and very often young people ask me, why does the church hate gay people? Guys, listen, the church is teaching about sexual ethics and specifically about homosexuality does not come from bigotry or discrimination. The church's teaching in this area comes from two places: divine law and natural law. Divine law is the stuff that we see written in the Bible. Natural law is the stuff we see written in our hearts and in human nature and in the nature of things, and we read it. Okay, listen, the church didn't make up this whole teaching about gay marriage and same-sex activity. The church discovered that. Not just the church, but people all around the world throughout history. Listen, you go to the most distant jungles in Brazil, and you see that people have figured out marriage, okay? Well, not something they just thought, sat around, hey, let's make up this institution. It's written in the nature of things. So what do I mean by that? It's written in the very nature of our procreating bodies that a man and woman belong with each other, that a man gives his body to a woman gives her body to a man, that a baby comes out of that. Because that human life demands so much responsibility, that man has to get in front of the whole tribe or village or town or whatever it is and make a promise, a commitment to that person to care for that baby and not just leave this woman with that baby. So the institution of marriage comes from the very nature of our procreating bodies. It's written in nature. So the church recognizes what's written in nature and what's written in the Bible. That doesn't come from a place of discrimination. Guys, that teaching isn't discriminatory at all because it applies to everyone evenly across the board, including me as a married man. Look, if I wanted to cheat on my wife, I wouldn't look at the church's teaching and say, well, the church is discriminating against me because it won't let me do that. All right? Now, does this teaching mean that the church is inviting all people with same-sex attraction to a life of emptiness and despair and darkness? No. We're not inviting them to a loveless life. Listen, most of the saints in the Catholic Church were celibate. They weren't having sex. Our bishops, priests, celibate. Jesus Christ, a celibate. Okay, the invitation to follow Jesus, the invitation to follow divine and natural law in this area for the person with same-sex attraction is not an invitation to a life of emptiness. See, fulfillment isn't achieved in life by having sex, whether you're homosexual or heterosexual. Fulfillment in life is achieved by living a life of love, following the laws of God, laying down our life in love for other people. And for people who struggle with same-sex attraction, and I got some good friends who are Catholics who are living out the church's teaching in this area. They're not empty. They're laying down their life in love and service for other people. They have deep friendships, deep lives of service. All right, but for those people, yeah, it's a heavy cross to bear, and it's not easy at all. And the church teaches, the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, they must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity, and every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. So we got to stand up for the dignity of all people, regardless of sexual orientation or anything at all in this area. And finally, I want to say this, guys. Sexual orientation doesn't define a person at their core. Some young people think, well, gosh, I feel this way. Is that who I am? First of all, for a lot of teenagers, they might feel that way in a passing way that will often go away as they get older, okay? But for those people who it doesn't go away for, that doesn't define you at your core. Mother Teresa of Calcutta started the first AIDS hospice in New York City. And people referred to the people she cared to as homosexuals. And I'm told once she told them, you know, don't talk to them about them that way. Don't label them that way. They're not homosexual. They're children of God. See, at our core, we're not defined by a sexual orientation. People are defined at their core as children of their Heavenly Father.
Welcome back to Life on the Rock. I'm Doug Barry along with Father Mark, and you are watching us or listening to us in the Rock House. And our guest tonight, Trent Horn from Catholic Answers. Trent is one of these amazing prodigies, if you will, in the Catholic comic book world. And who would you be then? You called yourself the boy wonder, but
I really don't want to be Robin. I don't want to be. If I had to pick any comic book hero, I would end up being. It would probably be the Flash. You know, wants to dash in there, has fun with it. Sometimes though, he might need the other bigger people in the Justice League to help out. But zooming around, taking care of everything that needs to be taken care of. He's actually a comic book hero I've enjoyed a lot. So maybe I would be him if I'm alongside Catholic Superman and Catholic Batman.
So. No desire to be Ant-Man?
Maybe after the movie comes out, yeah, I'd like to do that. So
That's an interesting one. Someone got bored. They couldn't come up with any more characters.
problem is that's Marvel. I was talking about DC.
Oh, gotcha.
so.
Okay. Oh, okay. Now, is that a big thing with Jimmy Aiken and you all? Is it the DC Marvel competition?
I've seen him wear shirts from both companies,
Okay.
so I think he's open to anyone in comic book lore,
Okay.
regardless.
Okay, back to more serious matters. It's really serious stuff here. Okay, the video before we went on the break there, Chris Stefanik talking about this great question.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a very, very serious time that we're in, obviously. You know, what was mentioned in the first segment about Sister Lucia telling Cardinal Caffarra that the final battle between Satan's reign and the Lord is going to be over family and marriage. And we're seeing this really impact on a global scale very, very seriously now. Apostasy, people leaving the faith, secularism, atheism rising, Pew Research poll recently that came out a couple months ago, and now we see this issue on marriage. And a lot of people, when you break it down to the individual grassroots moment, dealing with family members, people at work, people at school, regarding this question, does the church hate gays? As that video from Chris Stefanik addressed. Your take and comment on the church's position and the understanding of this truth regarding homosexual attraction.
Well, I think that there's really two issues that we have to focus on. One is the pastoral issue. How do you address someone who is engaged in sin but lives in a culture that reinforces to them that this sin is a part of their identity? So how do you address that person? And I think Chris made some good points that using labels, and I don't use labels like homosexual or gay or lesbian. I talk about those who have or struggle with same-sex attraction. And then I talk about the idea that we are all men and women made in the image and likeness of God. And so reaching out to those who have this attraction to let them know the areas where we agree. For example, unjust discrimination. Saying, for example, that 40 years ago there was a terrible fire, for example, at a self-described gay bar in New Orleans called the Upstairs Lounge. And after, many people died and it was tragic, and some radio hosts would make jokes about this, and that's certainly uncalled for. So the jokes and dehumanizing people in that way. So pastorally reaching out to others and letting them know that their sexual behavior is not their identity for any of us is one issue. And the other issue, aside from the pastoral issue, would be the philosophical and the theological issues. Understanding, reaching the question, what is our sexuality for? I believe there are true answers to this question, and the church's teaching best explains it. So sometimes when people say to me, well, why is the church against gays? I'll pivot back and ask them, well, what is your framework for sexual ethics? What is okay and what is not okay when it comes to sexual behavior? Because even people who support same-sex behavior, there are certain things for them that's off limits. They'll say that, I remember I was reading once a blog from a self-identified gay blogger, and he referenced a story about a man who wanted to marry his own grandmother, and he just responded with a long ew in the post. But in the comments, many people agreed with him, but some people said, wait a minute, if we condemn this because it grosses us out, what about people who are going to condemn us for the same reason?
All right.
And so I actually have a blog on my website at trenthorn.com called Sharing the Faith at a Gay Pride Parade. So I was once going for a jog in San Diego and came across this very large annual parade, and I started talking to people who were there and just asked them questions and asked them, well, what is your viewpoint and framework for sexual ethics? And I said to them, my problem with this is if we just boil it down to consenting adults, that can get into almost anything goes territory, things that even both of us agree is wrong. And so I said to them, much as what Chris said in the video, I believe we should root our sexuality not just in what people consent to do, but in what our natures, what our bodies are ordered towards. And that gives us the clue to what sexual morality is. So I think both those areas have to be taken into account, but it is a tough issue. But we still have to present the truth, but do so in a loving way.
Right. And you talk about kind of this opening of a door, if you will. Once we say this, then other things can be allowed. And there's the story of the 18 or 19-year-old girl in New Jersey who wants to marry her father. They were separate for many years and got together, relationship began, and now they want to get married, and incestual relationships are legal in New Jersey. So this is something that's being pushed, and it's causing some people to be very squeamish, but it does present this problem.
I remember once I was actually in Balboa Park in San Diego filming a documentary about why people disagree with the church. And one young man said, well, because of same-sex marriage, I disagree. So I pivoted the question. I said to him, there's 500,000 polyamorous unions in the United States, people where there's more than 2 people in the romantic union. So these groups of 3 or 4 people, should they be allowed to be married, 3 or 4 people within a marriage? He said, well, no, of course not. I said, well, under your view, if marriage is just about recognizing love, why do you limit the number? You say you shouldn't limit it by gender or sex, yet you want to limit love in a certain way. And he just ended up saying, well, I know it's a double standard, but it's my double standard. But that's what we have to do, is to say, one, put forward the evidence for our position. And when we talk about marriage, you can talk about the universality of marriage, why uniting men and women is the only kind of union that explains why marriage has the elements of permanence and sexual exclusivity. And then asking the other side, those who disagree, and many Catholics don't do this, to say, well, how do you know your position is true? Give me evidence for your side. And, okay, what about this? Can your viewpoint explain facet X? And usually it can't, and that gives more evidence for what we believe.
Right, right. And where do you project this goes from here? If we don't put this restraint of God's design on it, and it is just let loose as it is being let loose, where do you think this goes?
I think ultimately this is going to be detrimental for children in the future. And what we'll see, the detriment to children, we can just look back 30 or 40 years ago when no-fault divorce laws were introduced in the United States. The reason marriage has been redefined to accommodate same-sex unions so quickly is because marriage was previously redefined through no-fault divorce. By saying that marriage can be dissolved for basically any reason, you don't believe permanence is a part of marriage. And if permanence isn't a part of marriage, there's no reason to think men and women need to be permanently united. It's only about uniting adults to satisfy their desire for love and companionship. So since the permanent aspect was redefined, when we redefine the gender requirement that it's about men and women, suddenly marriage will just become a lot weaker. There'll be no reason to think men, women, or anyone need to stay together any longer than they need to be. And that's bad for children, because marriage is not for satisfying the adult desire for love and companionship. Those things are good. But for example, the government doesn't set up a registry where you go to City Hall and register with your best friend to get a best friend certificate. It's none of the government's business. But children are very, very helpless. And so government steps in and regulates marriage so that there's an institution that unites little boys and little girls who are very helpless, little babies even, with the mother and father that created them. That mother and father are irreplaceable to them. No one, they can be, adoption can do its best to imitate them, but they're irreplaceable.
Sure.
So why we have marriage is that before a mom and dad become irreplaceable to the children they procreate, marriage makes them irreplaceable to one another by uniting them in a lifelong, sexually exclusive union. And so I worry by continually redefining marriage to satisfy adult desires, it's inevitably going to take away from children's needs in the future and keep them from growing up to become well-adjusted members of society.
Right. This is an aspect of just moral relativism, marital relativism.
Well, relativism, yes, is the idea is that there's no overarching standard of morality. It's relative to what each individual or culture believes. Now, I don't think the culture we live in is purely morally relativistic. That what's funny is people do believe in certain moral absolutes or absolute truths. For example, they believe absolutely it's wrong to discriminate against people who identify as gay or lesbian. They absolutely believe hate crimes are wrong. So there's many things that people believe are wrong, that our culture does operate under a moral code. The relativism comes in when the moral code seems to be right and wrong is just about hurting people. If I do something and it doesn't hurt anybody else, what's wrong with it? And so people will say, I understand pedophilia is wrong because it hurts children, but when 2 men engage in sexual union, no one's getting hurt, at least that can be seen. So what's wrong with it? And we have to step in and say, wait, this standard of just consent and not hurting anyone, it's too low. It leads to things like incest that we talked about before, other sexual disorders, other disordered ways of living. Rather, we need to put forward the idea that man only is truly alive when he lives according to the nature found within his body, found within what God has intended for him.
Now, and along those lines, you mentioned pedophilia. That was something I wanted to bring up too, because it was
never a pleasant topic, but one that has to be broached sometimes.
It really, yeah, exactly.
No,
and
yes.
it's very discerning or disconcerting to see what's going on, that there are conferences and events taking place in Europe and even in America where they're getting together discussing and you've got psychologists involved in these. And is it the DSM that makes these decisions on what is disordered and what is a mental disorder and such?
Yes, and we've seen this change. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. It's what's used by the American Psychological Association, and it's gone through different revisions. There was a time before 1973 when homosexual behavior was disordered. Then that was changed, though mostly for political reasons. Recently in the DSM-5, what was called gender identity disorder, or when, for example, a man thinks he's a woman, was renamed gender dysphoria, so that when a man thinks he's a woman, he's not disordered, rather he feels bad because he feels he's trapped in the wrong body. So the proper method of treatment would be gender reassignment or sex change surgery. And so I do worry in the future, what if the DSM says, well, maybe sex isn't related to procreation and children are sexual beings and maybe this doesn't hurt them. And so what's interesting here is that most people agree pedophilia is wrong. That's at least one thing the culture, we can all agree on. But why is that the case? For secular people, they can only rely on social sciences to say, well, it hurts little children. They grow up in a negative way. And I agree that's one reason that it's wrong. But I would say, what if people tried to make it so it didn't hurt children and things like that? It would still be wrong because little boys and girls before puberty, age 5 or 6, they're not sexual beings. Their bodies are not ordered towards the ends of sexuality, which is procreation and lifelong unity. So the Catholic position about how our bodies are ordered towards the unitive factor and also procreation better explains why sex with young children is wrong. And that's why throughout the Church's history, the Catholic Church has always stood against child marriage. That one of the impediments to marriage is being too young. That children can't be married because their bodies are not ordered towards the proper end of marriage, which would be procreation.
But there is a push to make pedophilia.
There's always a push
to try to change this. But when you've got, and I just think that it needs to be come up because people need to be aware that this attempt is being made.
There are academics who speak about this, those overseas. In the deepest, darkest corner of the internet, called the dark web. It's the secret part of the internet where people try to search for things and their search results can't be traced. It's estimated that 80% of the dark web is child pornography. And so it's all over. And people will say, widespread acceptance of pedophilic behavior, that would never happen. Right. Well, then again, 50 years ago, even very liberal non-Catholic people would have said, same-sex marriage, that'll never happen. Right. But the way society changes, the more it changes, the harder it is to go back to moral order.
And quickly, before we go to the break, just the point, and we can address this more after the break, contraception, 1930, convert to Lambeth, Anglican Church. At that point, never would have thought. Now we're giving out birth control, Plan B, emergency birth control, and vending machines on college campuses, or giving it out to junior high students and high school students at will now. So you're right, these things are changing, and the Catholic Church is the only organization on the planet that brings order. It brings order to all these things, brings truth and order. Take a break, back with one more segment with Trent Horn. Don't go away. All right, back after this. Welcome back to Life on the Rock. I'm Doug Barry along with Father Mark. We're the Rock House compadres. This is EWTN, and we have with us in the Rock House Trent Horn from Catholic Answers. Used to be the boy wonder, now he's moving towards Flash. Guy's fast. He's quick. He thinks on his feet really well. You love to debate. You love to get into the conversations. The radio show, Catholic Answers Live, you're constantly taking on, the toughest questions that come from people, always in great charity. You have a nice demeanor for this, your personality. You don't seem to get too worked up too easily. Is this the way you always are?
Well, I try to. I understand that when people are attacking the church or giving, very tough arguments to me or very emotional arguments, I understand it's not personal. They're not mad at me. There's something they vigorously disagree with. And my role is, with the aid of the Holy Spirit, to try to lead them to the truth and ask them questions in return. And even when they criticize me, and people, when you get out there and do this more, are apt to say mean things about you on the internet. I'd typically either say okay, that's not true, so that doesn't bother me, or that is true, and then maybe I need to work on this argument, or I need to have a better disposition. But the fact of the matter is, it's not about me. It's about him, and leading people to that truth. And that's why on the radio show, I understand that the person I'm talking to is not an enemy to defeat. It's someone who I believe is mistaken, and they might think I'm mistaken. So I want to share truth with them and ask them questions and try to get them to walk, so we both of us walk towards truth together instead of kind of fighting toe to toe.
Right. Yeah. Understanding that it's about the message, not the messenger. The messenger shouldn't take it too personally.
No. And so for some people who've had a bad experience with a church or with a pro-lifer, or a bad experience with someone who was, very mean towards them for their sexual orientation, they might use me as a kind of a verbal punching bag. And that's okay. If they need to get that out, that's fine. If it helps to clear away that emotional hurdle to lead them to the truth, I'm all for that. And then I want to, firmly, ask them key questions to get them to reconsider their worldview and consider the worldview I adopt instead.
All right. Well, in the little bit of time that we have left in this show, two major issues, along with the marriage issue, which we addressed pretty thoroughly in the last segment. Atheism's on the rise.
Yes.
Secularism and atheism's on the rise. A lot of people calling themselves the none group, N-O-N-E. I just have none. I have none religion, religion, none at all. And you've got, obviously, the pro-life battle, which is just ongoing, trying to defend human life. And obviously we could cover, one of these for 3 hours.
Sure.
Give us a little overview of each of those two, what you see going on in the world regarding them, and how do we engage them? You've got two great books on this, and the books are?
I have Answering Atheism and Persuasive Pro-Life.
And how can people get those books?
Well, they can go get them at Catholic Answers. Each book has its own website, so answeringatheism.com, you can get a copy there, and persuasiveprolife.com. You can get a copy there or at your local Catholic bookstore.
Excellent.
For each of those subjects, I would recommend breaking the conversation down in this way. For the pro-life issues, when it comes to abortion, I focus on one key question: what are the unborn? When many people defend abortion today, they'll say, well, I know abortion's bad, but what about people in poverty? And if we make it illegal, what about back alley abortion? What we need to do is ask key questions. Why don't you like abortion? Well, because it takes a life. Well, okay, if it takes a life, don't you think that life should be protected under the law? We would never kill a 2-year-old just because they lived in poverty. If the unborn are just as human as a 2-year-old, why not protect them as well? Asking questions to get at the root. What are the unborn, and why not treat them, because they're biological human beings, why not treat them humanely, just like other smaller, helpless human beings? And in my book, Persuasive Pro-Life, I outline how to do that with lots of different dialogue techniques, tools, things like that.
Kind of goes back to what you said earlier in the show about consistency. Be consistent in these points.
Absolutely. Because if you say, well, a person is just anyone who can think and be rational, well, you're right. That would mean the unborn are not persons, but that would also mean newborn babies aren't persons. Now, there's a few academics who say, yeah, newborns aren't persons, but most normal man on the street will say, oh, that's ridiculous. Of course newborns are people. Right. Well, how do you know that? Well, because they're human. What do you mean they're human? Well, they have a human mother and father. Okay, but then the unborn child, he has a human mother and father too, right? And then, we get into the problem and that worldview collapses. When I talk about atheism, I try to boil it down to this question: does God exist? Only 3 ways you can answer: yes, no, or I don't know. If you say no, he doesn't exist, you got to give me a good reason to think so. And most philosophers, even atheistic philosophers, agree there's no good reason that proves God doesn't exist. But when it comes to showing God exists, when we engage atheists, I find this is the mentality. Oh, you silly Christian, you're just going to appeal to God of the gaps. We don't know this, so God did it. But eventually science is going to figure it out, and you're going to be left out in the cold. But in my book, Answering Atheism, I use philosophical arguments that don't say, here's something in the universe we don't explain, therefore God. Rather, I say there are aspects of reality that science can never explain, that require a greater philosophical explanation. The fact that the universe began to exist from nothing, that the laws of nature are finely tuned so that life can even exist and evolve, and that there are moral truths nearly everybody agrees with that have to come from a perfectly moral person. And so I lay those out in the book, but the goal is to show that there's aspects of reality that science can't explain that ultimately have to come from God as their source, and that's why I put all of that in my book, Answering Atheism.
All right. Well, again, it goes back to a certain consistency in the way that your debate or your discussion or argument is going.
Right.
So you want consistency from them.
Absolutely.
In order for there to be any ground to discuss.
For example, if an atheist says, well, I hate the Catholic Church because it's evil, shelters child molesters. Some people may say, Trent, you talked about pedophilia before. What about the Catholic Church sheltering pedophiles, this or that? And I'll ask them in response, well, okay, from your scientific worldview, the fact that it's wrong to hurt children, that's a fact. Can you scientifically prove that fact is true? Now, you can use science to prove certain behaviors hurt children, no doubt there. But science only shows us the way the world is, not the way the world ought to be or what we ought to do. So I'll say to this person, you believe in these objective moral truths, and you say it's silly to believe in God without scientific evidence, but you believe in immaterial, universal moral truths without scientific evidence. Why can't I believe in an immaterial, universal, perfectly moral being that grounds those truths? And science shows us the way the world is, but philosophy takes us to the next step and shows that world has a source in the Almighty God.
Excellent, and very consistent, very consistent. You can get your books also at EWTN Religious Catalog. It's EWTNRC.com. And again, the two books are?
Answering Atheism and Persuasive Pro-Life. And at Catholic.com, I have a number of booklets that are available on why believe in Jesus, on Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, faith and science. And so they can see some of that at shop.catholic.com as well.
I have a good idea. Much more will be coming out of you. Thanks, Trent. Awesome. Keep
Thank
up
you
the
for
great
having me.
work. Keep fighting the good fight.
You keep fighting the good fight.
Amen, brother. Father?
May our Heavenly Father shine His face upon you. May He give you His peace. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We'll see you next week.